Hello, Algebra 1. Very excited to teach this lesson to you online. This is lesson 88. You'll want to have your packet R available. Have that flipped over to lesson 88, please. And then in your book, we are going to be on page 370. If you would please, we're going to start with the images at the top of your notes. And you'll see that we are talking about quadratic equations and solving those quadratic equations by factoring. So I'm going to zoom in for a moment and just talk about these parabolas. Parabolas are the graphic illustration of a quadratic equation. On the first image, you'll see that there are two x-intercepts. What that means is the parabola actually hits on the x-axis in these two places. And when you solve that algebraically, you're going to get x equals, and there will be two answers. The next image shows what happens if that parabola happens to fall on the x-axis exactly on the vertex or tip of the parabola. We would only have one solution. And then sometimes that parabola is just kind of floating above the x-axis. In this last image, we would have no solutions when we're solving for x algebraically. So that gives you a visual of what we'll be doing algebraically. But the first thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about the quadratic setup. If you'll find on star 1, this is a quadratic equation. I know that because it has x squared as one of my terms. There is an equal sign, meaning it is an equation. I see that it happens to be a trinomial. So I'm going to start off by writing this quadratic equation in descending order. We're going to have our x squared go first, then plus 3x minus 18 equals 0. And then next we need to factor. And for those who are wanting to use the little diamond method off to the side, I'll get you started on that. Recall that up top we would put our c value, that is negative 18. In the bottom slot we put the positive 3, that's the b value. And we come up with two factors that will multiply to get to negative 18, and they will either add or subtract to get to the 3. So while doing this, trying different ones, I could try 1 times 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6, and right there, that should click that 3 and 6 are going to be ones that when we subtract, result in the 3 and the b value. So I'm going to factor this x plus 6, x minus 3. All right, so that part should be review. The next thing that is new is these are set equal to 0. In the past, we have not had it as an equation, we've had it as an expression. So when we set something equal to 0, we call on the zero product property. So off to the side, I'm just going to refresh your memory on what that is. This is something you would have learned back in middle school. And it basically said if we have two things being multiplied, let's say x times y, and we say that it equals 0, we can make a conclusion that x could be 0 or y could be 0. One of them has to be 0 in order to get a result product of 0. We could also make the conclusion that they are both 0. So from this product property, we're going to pull in our factors and set each of them equal to 0. X plus 6 equals 0. X minus 3 equals 0. Okay, and then I will solve each of those equations down here. I'm going to subtract 6 to the other side, so I get x equals negative 6. On this one, I'm going to add 3 to the other side, and I get x equals 3. That is my solution. So in going back to what our drawings are, this is like the image number 1. This parabola would have hit on two intercepts of the x-axis. Going over to question 2 now. And we are going to notice that this one is not set up quite right. We need to move things over to the left side. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 9x squared back over to this side of the equation. and that would result in 9x squared minus 16 equals 0. There are two ways that I could go about solving this equation. I'm going to show you the factoring method, and then I'll also show you how we can set this equal to 16 and square root both sides. So if I were to start off by just factoring, I would notice that this type of binomial is a special type of binomial. It's called a difference of squares. And when we do a difference of squares, we factor a special way. Okay, we set up our two binomials, and we take the square root of the first term, so that would be 3x. Put that in each pair. And we take the square root of the 16, that's 4. And then we have a plus and a minus represented in each binomial. So this is now factored 3x plus 4, 3x minus 4. I'm going to use my zero product property to set each of these equal to 0. So 3x plus 4 equals 0, 3x minus 4 equals 0. Let's solve that for x. In this case, I subtract a 4 over, and I divide by 3. I get x equals negative 4/3. The second equation, I add the 4 over, and I divide by 3. I get x equals positive 4/3. Those are my two solutions. Now I'm going to show you an alternate way that you could also solve this type of problem. The alternate method is going to work when we have a binomial, not a trinomial, but a binomial situation where only the x squared is found in the first term. So I'm going to go back to this 9x squared minus 16, and I'm going to add the 16 over to the right side and solve for x. In this case, I would need to divide by 9. 16 over 9 does not reduce. The next step is I would square root both sides. When I square root on that right side, I'm introducing a plus minus. The left side, the square root and the square cancel, and I have x equals plus or minus 4 over 3, because the square root of 16 is 4, the square root of 9 is 3. That is the same solution as what we got when we first factored there in the blue. So either method is appropriate. You just find which one works best for you. Now you're going to want to look in your book. This is on page 370, and we're going to the problems A and B from your practice questions. So you can follow along on your notes. This is question A as it's written in your book. X squared equals negative 5x plus 24. And you'll recall from our notes above, the first thing we do is we get this organized. We move everything over to the left side. We want our trinomial to be on the left side. We want it to be in descending order. So I have x squared plus 5x minus 24 equals 0. Now that I have it in the correct order, I am going to work on factoring. I need to come up with factors of 24 that are going to add or subtract to 5. And after I make my list of factors of 24, I find 8 and 3 will work for this. So I'm going to break it down into x plus 8, x minus 3, and again, this is all set equal to 0. Now we use the zero product property, and we take each of those binomials, set them equal to 0 separately, and then solve each x. The first one I'm going to have to subtract the 8 to the right side. I get x equals negative 8. The second one, I add 3 to the right side. I get x equals 3. Those are my two solutions, negative 8 and positive 3. Then I'm going to move over to question B. And I'm writing this from book, page 370. The original layout is negative 48 plus x squared equals negative 8x. And we start off by putting this in the correct order. Everybody moves to the left side in descending order. So we want that x squared to be first. We add the 8x over and the minus 48, all set equal to 0. Then I'm looking for factors of 48 that will add or subtract to get to 8. This one's a little bit trickier. We're going to end up finding 12 and 4 will work. It is x plus 12, x minus 4 equals 0. Again, we notice that the zero product property allows us to take each of these equations down here and solve, setting them equal to 0. The first equation, I get x equals negative 12. The second one, I get x equals 4. Those are my two solutions. That's it for the notes part. We're going to go into the actual homework lesson, and we're going to try question number 8. So I'm going to zoom back out for us to find question 8 in the homework. It's our first highlight, and I'm going to zoom back in. We're on still page 370 of your book. Question 8, written in its original form. We have 28 equals x squared minus 3x. And I'm going to move everybody over to the left side. When I do that, I get negative x squared plus 3x plus 28 equals 0. But a factoring hint that I can give you is it's much harder to factor when we have that leading coefficient as a negative. So because of that leading coefficient being a negative, I'm going to multiply everybody by a negative 1. In other words, change signs for everybody. And it's much easier to factor if we have a positive out front. Now when I go to factor, I have 28 as the number I need products for, and they need to add or subtract to get to a negative 3. So I get x minus 7, x plus 4, again set equal to 0, each of those set to 0, and you get the solution of x equals 7 and x equals negative 4. We're going to go over to question 9. I think you'll find 9 is a little bit friendlier. It is set up x squared equals 25. This is one of those special ones that has an x squared and just one other term. And so we are going to use the square root method. We're going to start off by square rooting both sides. When we introduce that square root on both sides, remember we introduce the plus minus. On the left side, the square root and the square cancel. So I get x equals plus or minus 5. Another way that you can write that is x equals 5 and x equals negative 5. So there are two solutions. That's it for number 9. We're going to scoot over to number 10. Number 10, originally written as x squared minus 6 equals x. And let's move everybody to the left side, put them in the correct order. So I have x squared minus x minus 6 equals 0. From here, we're going to factor. This is a tricky factor. You're not going to do factors 1 and 6. You're going to do factors 2 and 3. In order to get that middle term negative, the bigger number, the 3, has to be negative. So it's going to be x minus 3, x plus 2 equals 0. From there, You guys know where to go. We're going to set each of these to 0 and solve. So x is equal to 3 and x is equal to -2. And some of my mentals, you know who you are. I have a feeling you are able to go straight from this step down to the answer, and that is just fine. There's no problem with that. All right, let's go then over to question 11. Number 11, we're going to start off -x squared minus 8x equals 16. Looks like we need to move the 16 over to the left side. So I have -x squared minus 8x minus 16 equals 0. Not only is that a lot of negatives, but we want our first term especially to be a positive. So I'm going to go through and multiply everybody by a -1, change signs, and look at that, everybody's going to become a positive by changing signs. Now I'm ready to factor products of 16 that will add to 8. And this one's one of those nice ones. I get x plus 4 equals 0. This one's special in that both of these answers are going to come out the same. Both answers get x equals -4. So this is that special one where just the vertex of the parabola is touching on the x-axis, and so there is only one solution. You don't need to write x equals -4 twice. You're only going to need it one time. That's it for our class notes. Hope you have a wonderful homeschool day.